Okay, let's dive straight into something that feels both ancient and totally up for grabs right now. The rules, or maybe the lack of rules, for friendships between men and women.
Yeah,
You ever feel like there's this invisible tightrope we're all walking, dictated by, I don't know, rom-coms, maybe just societal awkwardness?
definitely. And what's really eye-opening, I think, is realizing just how much of that tightrope is, well, constructed. It's not inherent.
Right.
Our sources today, they really shine a light on cultures where that awkwardness just isn't there. It's a whole different blueprint for these connections.
Okay, so let's go there. Meghalaya, India. The Kazi people, right? A matrilineal society.
Uh-huh.
And we hear about Kima and Danya, lifelong friends. What hits you first is just how normal their bond is, like completely normal.
Yeah, Daniel even says they don't really have a word for the friend zone.
No concept for it. Instead, they have this beautiful idea, Erid Kachinjim, the thread of life that ties all souls.
It really makes you pause and question the rigid boxes we tend to use.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that kind of gets to the heart of this deep dive, doesn't it? Challenging that modern pressure, which seems amplified now by algorithms and stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Pushing men and women into these corners, either lovers or, like, enemies.
Kima's point about Bollywood dramas constantly reinforcing that binary is spot on. It shows how powerful cultural stories are in shaping this.
And it's not just one place. The deep dive takes us to Okinawa, Japan. The Moai system.
Ah, yes, the Moai. Basically lifelong support networks, crucially mixed gender ones.
And get this, the elders there, they connect these friendships directly to why they live so long.
Right, alongside diet and exercise. It's fundamental.
So it's not just, having a buddy. It's about core well-being, emotional sustenance.
Exactly. The Okinawans show us this isn't just a nice-to-have social thing. It's potentially vital for longevity. It makes you think, how much do we lose when our society kind of discourages these deep platonic bonds? That quote from anthropologist Chi Sakurai really hits home. When work silos men and women, friendship becomes a radical act.
Wow, a radical act. It suggests our modern structures, like work, might actually be working against these natural connections.
Yeah, inadvertently perhaps, but the effect is there.
Okay, so the mission here, as I see it, is to really unpack this. How are these friendships evolving? How are norms shifting? And crucially, what can we learn from all these different examples, past and present?
Exactly. What can we take away from these diverse cultures and times to maybe enrich our own understanding and connections?
Which leads to the big question, if these connections are so important, why do they often feel so tricky, so complicated in many places today?
Well, our sources suggest we need to look back, way back, centuries even, to understand how these complexities developed in the first place.
Okay, let's do it. Back to the ancient blueprints, as the deep dive calls them. Turns out, long before Hollywood, myths often celebrated really powerful cross-gender friendships.
Yeah, think about Gilgamesh. We all know about him and Enkidu, that intense male bond.
Right.
But the deep dive points us towards his friendship with Siduri, the divine alewife.
Siduri. Okay, what's her role?
Well, that's the key thing. She doesn't offer him romance when he's grieving and seeking immortality. She offers wisdom. Real, practical, maybe tough wisdom.
Her famous line, "You will never find the life you seek." That's her.
That's her. It's this pivotal moment of guidance. And it sets up this ancient model for Platonic intimacy, where the value is insight, understanding, totally separate from romance.
Interesting. Then we jump to the Mahabharata, the Hindu epic, Draupadi and Krishna.
Another incredibly powerful friendship, an alliance, really.
And that moment, the horrific attempt to disrobe her, Krishna intervenes. But how?
Not as a husband or a lover, but as a Saka, a friend. Dr. Platonic's analysis emphasizes this wasn't just a rescue, it was about upholding her dignity through their friendship, mutual empowerment.
Saka. That feels like a really deep concept. Trust, support, beyond the usual roles, almost spiritual.
It really is. And it's fascinating, this isn't just an Eastern idea. We see echoes in West African Yoruba myths.
Like Ocean and Shango, goddess of love, god of thunder.
Exactly. Portrayed as strategic confidants, allies working together, which feels quite different from, say, the Greek gods, like Zeus, where relationships often seem more transactional.
Right, yeah. More power plays there.
And these ancient myths, they weren't just entertainment, they were like social instruction manuals, social contracts almost.
How so?
Archaeologist Zainab Barani points out that Mesopotamian legal codes actually reference Siduri's advice from the epic.
No way.
Yeah, it shows that the wisdom from these kinds of cross-gender relationships, these advisory roles, held real weight in society, in governance even. Her point is stark. Friendship was governance. Excluding women's perspectives was seen as destabilizing.
Okay, so if these friendships were valued, even embedded in governance, what happened? What changed?
The deep dive points pretty strongly towards colonialism. It calls it the colonial cut, a period that fundamentally fractured these norms and weaponized suspicion between men and women.
Weaponized suspicion. How did that work?
It was a huge shift. You had legal frameworks like Britain's Coverture Doctrine around 1765 that basically erased women's independent legal identities.
Tied them to husbands or fathers, right?
Exactly. So suddenly, a friendship between a man and a woman, especially an unmarried woman, looked like a threat to inheritance, to the whole patriarchal setup.
Just talking to a man could get a woman accused of seduction.
Seriously. With real social and legal consequences, it created this atmosphere of danger around simple interaction.
And it wasn't just laws imposed from Britain, right? Missionaries played a role too.
A huge role globally. And the deep dive gives examples like dismantling the Kikuyu's Mutuai system in Kenya, where men and women co-owned land. Or rebranding Igdo Otu Ogbo societies. These were mixed-gender community groups, calling them secret cults.
Wow. It feels like a deliberate strategy to break down existing social fabrics.
It does. And then the Victorian separate spheres ideology just poured fuel on that fire globally. It affected laws, religion, everyday life.
Like banning women from Japanese kabuki theater, erasing centuries of female artists.
Precisely. Or the really horrific treatment of Two-Spirit youth in U.S. Indian schools, forced separation, punishment. It was about breaking those community bonds.
That quote from psychologist Kim Tallbear is chilling. Colonizers knew, if you kill friendships between men and women, you kill a culture's ability to self-govern.
It cuts right to it. These personal bonds are deeply tied to broader societal power and resilience.
And this isn't just history buried in the past. The deep dive links it directly to today. That 2021 Harvard study.
Right, finding more gender segregation in workplaces, in nations with a history of British colonialism. The patterns linger.
Historian Marie Lugana said, colonialism replaced collaboration with control, and we're still unlearning that. That feels incredibly relevant right now.
It really does. It suggests that a lot of the awkwardness or suspicion we might feel around cross-gender friendships today isn't just random. It has these deep historical roots in systems designed to control and divide.
Okay, but thankfully it's not all bleak. The narrative shifts. The deep dive moves into the trust experiment, looking at things happening now that are trying to foster positive change.
Yes, and this is where it gets genuinely inspiring. There's evidence that intentionally creating spaces for men and women to interact as equals can have measurable, positive results.
Like the program in Uruguay, Jóvenes en Red.
Exactly. Teenagers collaborating on designing public parks. And they saw a 34% lower rate of intimate partner violence reported in a UNICEF study.
34%. How?
Well, sociologist Dr. Lila Fernandez put it simply, when boys build seesaws alongside girls, they stop seeing them as weak. Shared work, equal footing, it dismantles stereotypes.
Makes sense. And in Brazil, the Frente de Amizade in Rio's favelas.
Another great example. Mixed gender teams repairing infrastructure, hosting dialogues. They saw a 41% drop in catcalling.
41%. Again, just by working together on practical stuff.
It seems so. Building that mutual respect through collaborative action, it changes how people see each other.
And it's not just stories, there's science backing this up.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff. Neuroimaging studies showing more activity in brain areas linked to empathy during Platonic cross-gender interactions.
Empathy literally lighting up.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And that Cornell study from 2022, men with close female friends were 27% more likely to challenge sexist jokes.
Okay, so these friendships actively contribute to a better social environment. Less sexism.
The evidence points that way. But, the deep dive keeps it real. Progress isn't happening everywhere at the same speed.
Right, the contrast between Norway and Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Norway's got high gender integration in sports, shrinking wage gaps. Saudi Arabia, despite Vision 2030, still has strict school segregation. It's a reminder that individual actions matter, but so does policy.
Hala Al-Dasari's quote, "Trust isn't magic, it's policy."
That sums it up perfectly. The broader societal framework, the laws, the policies, they either help or hinder this trust building on a big scale.
Okay, so where do people find ways to nurture these connections, sometimes against the grain? The deep dive talks about the sister-brother dialect.
Yeah, this is about movements reclaiming cross-gender friendship within their own cultures and religions, often reinterpreting traditions.
Like the group in Cairo, Igsi, Sisters and Brothers.
A fascinating collective. They're looking at Islamic theology, highlighting the Prophet Muhammad's own deep friendships with women, like Waraka.
So finding precedent within the tradition itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amal Khalid, one of the co-founders, talks about the Prophet's grief for his friend Safiya, showing these bonds were profound, based on shared humanity. And the group's growth, 200% since 2020, shows there's a real hunger for this.
And similar things elsewhere.
In Kerala, India, the Sri Sahitya Collective is rereading Hindu epics, focusing on Draupadi and Krishna again, but specifically as a model for non-transactional allyship.
Allyship. That's a key word.
Definitely. And then you have the Zapatistas in Mexico. Their Caracals councils actually mandate co-leadership by men and women.
Mandated. Based on what?
Based on Mayan traditions of gender complementarity and governance. It's not a new import. It's reclaiming something older. Commander Hortensia's quote is powerful. Friendship isn't a Western idea. It's how we survived conquest.
Wow, connecting friendship directly to resilience, cultural survival.
It shows this desire for authentic cross-gender connection is, well, pretty universal. And people are finding ways within their own context to support it.
Which brings us to technology. Algorithmic wingmen. Can tech help here?
Well, it's trying. It's an interesting development. Apps like Tomodachi Kisa in Japan.
What's their angle?
They match people based on shared hobbies, kintsugi, drone racing, whatever. Not romance. The idea is to create a less pressurized space.
And does it work?
They report 70% higher comfort levels in cross-gender chats compared to dating apps. The designer, Akira Sato, talks about redirecting potential tension into creativity to the shared interest.
Interesting. And Bumble BFF with their Platonic pledge.
Yeah, using prompts to encourage deeper connections, not just surface stuff. MIT's Dr. Reena Patel calls it tech scaffolding safer spaces for friendship.
Scaffolding, like building support structures.
Exactly. And there's even data suggesting a wider impact. That Stanford study from 2023 linked Friendship app used to an 18% higher rate of intergender collaboration at work.
So digital connections potentially bleeding over into real-world professional collaboration.
It seems possible. Thoughtfully designed platforms might actually play a positive role.
Okay, but it can't all be smooth sailing. When norms shift, there's usually pushback. The deep dive calls it backlash, the panic of uncontrolled bonds.
Yeah, and the examples here are pretty stark. They really show the anxieties that surface when traditional gender roles get challenged.
Like the hashtag no couple zone cafes in South Korea.
Exactly. Places meant for friends, not couples.
Mm.
The reaction was intense. Violent online backlash, political condemnation.
Why such a strong reaction?
Psychologist Ji-Hoon Lee suggested it tapped into deep fears about changing gender dynamics, women's economic independence, shifting expectations around marriage and family.
It wasn't just about cafes then, it was symbolic.
Very much so. And you see similar things elsewhere, like in Nigeria, feminist groups running mixed gender workshops facing threats, even condemnation from prominent religious figures like Pastor David Oyedepo.
So attempts to foster collaboration are seen as threats to established structures.
In some quarters, yes. But what's also remarkable is the resilience, how people respond to the backlash.
Like fraternity, formed by the hashtag no couple zone folks.
Yeah, training companies in Platonic communication skills. Taking that negative experience and turning it into something proactive. Suman Park, the founder, said it clearly. We're not anti-love. We're pro-choice in how we connect.
Pro-choice and connection, I like that. Expanding the options beyond just romance.
Exactly. Which leads nicely into the final section looking at Gen Z and the Friendship Constitution.
Okay, Gen Z. What are they bringing to this? The deep dive mentions emotional lateralization. What's that?
It's basically moving away from relying on just one or two primary relationships, like a spouse, for all your emotional needs.
Spreading it out more?
Kind of. Embracing a wider network. Different friends, regardless of gender, offering different kinds of support and intimacy, not putting all your emotional eggs in one basket, you could say.
And we're seeing this show up in actual changes.
We are, both formally and informally. You've got Sweden's vänskapsförordning that gives legal rights like hospital visits to platonic partners.
Actual legal recognition for friendship. Wow.
And then you have things like Mexico City's subway ads proclaiming Amistad is revolution, friendship is revolution. A big public statement.
And in Zambia, Wila Mwamba's work.
Yeah, friendship literacy training. Really interesting stuff. Blending traditional Bemba ideas about community with queer theory to build a really inclusive understanding of care and connection.
That Pew statistic is pretty telling too. 68% of Gen Z saying they've deconstructed gendered friendship roles.
It really points to a generational shift in thinking. And Wielam-Wamma's quote ties it all together beautifully, bringing back the historical context. Why police how we care? Colonialism made us strangers. Friendship is how we become neighbors again.
Becoming neighbors again through friendship. That's powerful.
It really is.
And so we circle back to Kima and Dania and Meghalaya. What are they up to now?
They're mentoring teenagers, actually, using platforms like TikTok to share stories of their own everyday genderless camaraderie. Their hashtag is perfect. #ThreadNotBox.
#ThreadNotBox. Love it. Captures that Kasi idea of the connecting thread, not restrictive boxes.
Exactly. And their work really embodies the central message here, I think, that friendship isn't just some side aspect of life. It's fundamental. It's a language.
Daniel called it the language we rebuild the world with.
Which feels spot on. It makes you really reconsider how much of the tension or awkwardness we feel between men and women is actually invented, the social construct.
Not inherent.
Not inherent. So what happens if we dismantle that? If we remove the demand for performance, the suspicion, and just allow for trust, for simple human connection?
What becomes possible then?
Well, the deep dive leaves us chewing on that, really, with that final provocative question from the sources.
Yeah.
If a matrilineal tribe with ancient traditions and a cutting-edge AI app can both point us toward valuing these deep cross-gender friendships, what excuses do the rest of us have?
That is someone to think about. A lot to think about.